What is the new Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer movie about? Well, it's about a few things. First, it's about the Manhattan Project, in a short answer, and it's also about a man named Julius Robert Oppenheimer. In this video, I'm going to get us a little familiar with who Robert Oppenheimer was, so let's get into it. There are some really cool things about this man, Robert Oppenheimer, that a lot of people just don't know. We're familiar with maybe the Manhattan Project, we're familiar with maybe the atomic bomb, but all that we know is that for some reason, Christopher Nolan has decided to make a movie about this man. During research, I found some pretty cool information that I think is going to play really well in his story. But first, we have to take some time to briefly get to know who he was as a person. In 1904, Julius Robert Oppenheimer was born to Ella and Julius Oppenheimer. He also had another brother named Frank. He was born in New York, and this is a Jewish family he was born into. During Oppenheimer's early years, he was a very bright student, and when he was finishing up his high school, he started getting a little bit of an interest in chemistry. Unfortunately, his ability to go to college was delayed a year after graduating. This is because he had some health issues and he needed some time to recover. So his father sent him to New Mexico where he could recover. It was there that Oppenheimer, at a younger age, discovered that he really enjoyed horseback riding as well as the Southwest United States. At the age of 18, Oppenheimer got better and he went to Harvard for his undergrad. And it was there where he majored in chemistry. In just 3.5 years, Oppenheimer graduated summa cum laude. During that time, he started to build an attraction towards experimental physics through a course on thermodynamics. After graduating, he went to Europe to study at 2 other universities, Cambridge and the University of Göttingen. During this time of Oppenheimer's life, he gained a little bit of a reputation for himself, and it wasn't a very pleasant one. A lot of people would say that he was annoying, he had self-destructive tendencies, he would go days without eating because he was so focused on his work, or he would just be smoking constantly, nonstop, every single day. He would annoy his fellow students and his professors by constantly challenging them or being loud during class, and he actually got in trouble quite a few times. He was a bit of a problem student in some people's mind, but no one could argue with his passion for theoretical physics.
Science has profoundly altered the conditions of man's life, both materially and in ways of the spirit as well. It has extended the range of questions in which man has a choice. It has extended man's freedom to make significant decisions.
Back in the States, Oppenheimer worked out his fellowship for 2 years at both California Institute for Technology and Harvard. Around this time was when Oppenheimer became friends with a man named Linus Paulings. And they had a pretty good friendship, a pretty good working friendship, until Oppenheimer started becoming a little too familiar with Paulings' wife. And after his wife reported the news to him of Oppenheimer's behavior towards her and even proposing that she come on a trip with him alone, Paulings ended the friendship and it kind of ended on really bad terms. At a certain point, Oppenheimer fell ill with tuberculosis, and so he and his brother Frank went to New Mexico for him to kind of get better as sort of a getaway vacation, and it was there he found a renewed childhood love for the Southwest, and he would say that his 2 greatest loves are physics and the desert country. He would later go on to start his professorship at Berkeley, and those around him, both students and colleagues, would describe him as hypnotic or mesmerizing in personal interactions, but more frigid in public settings. During this part of his career, he was extremely successful in, discovering new theories, working on equations that help you understand the universe and even black holes and X-rays and so many other big words that honestly, I don't know the name or meaning of, but I will say for about 10 years, he had a career where he was publishing papers and partnering on literature with other renowned names and making a really big dent in the theoretical physics world. And there were very few people around him that could keep up. Oppenheimer had his fair share of controversy, not only politically, but also personally. You remember when Oppenheimer was propositioning Pauling's wife to basically have an affair with him? Well, he ended up successfully doing that with a woman named Kitty, who is the wife of a man named Harrison. Now, Oppenheimer eventually married her, but it was after they had already started an affair while she was married, and she got pregnant, which was the catalyst for her to get a divorce from Harrison. And Oppenheimer was her fourth husband. But politically speaking, he was already deep in controversy because he had girlfriends and his new wife, Kitty, who was very closely associated with the Communistic Party. He himself was very left-leaning and progressive in his politics, and he kind of associated with the Communistic Party very openly at a younger age, and only later down the road shied away from it a little bit because of all of the rumors that was going on about his early life. But he made a lot of enemies because of this stigma. He went to the meetings in California for the Communistic Party, and he gave a lot of money to organizations that funded left-leaning progressive movements. Then enter the Manhattan Project. If you don't know what that is, it's basically research and development during World War II for nuclear weapons. Oppenheimer, because of his reputation, was made head of the research laboratory of the Manhattan Project. And due to the testing of these weapons, they had to be kind of away from civilization, in maybe the desert. And Oppenheimer had an answer. Guess where they did all of their testing and practices for the Manhattan Project?
From the New Mexico desert come first pictures of the sequel to the atom bomb's final test. From this observation tower, scientists watch the result of their years of work.
I don't want to give too much away of during this time period because I don't want to spoil it for the movie. But I will say during this time, there was a lot of pressure on the scientists to hurry up and figure out these nuclear weapons, hurry up and get it tested and be successful so that the war could basically be over, because they were worried that during World War II, the Germans would get it first. They would have their scientists discover these nuclear weapons, and all of a sudden that changes history forever. However, as we know from history, on July 16th, 1945, the first nuclear weapon exploded, and Oppenheimer called it Trinity. So after all of that information, you have to ask yourself, okay, how is Christopher Nolan guiding this project? Why, if there's so much information already out there, what story is going to be pulled from this? And honestly, what is Cillian Murphy? What's his performance going to look like? Well, the interesting thing about the actor choice is when I was reading through doing the research on Oppenheimer, he has self-destructive tendencies. He deals with depression a lot. He's got demons in his head. He's a bit antisocial. He's very melancholy in a lot of ways. To me, sounds like Thomas Shelby from Peaky Blinders. It sounds dang close to Thomas Shelby from Peaky Blinders. Not to mention, Cillian just looks like Oppenheimer. So then, Christopher Nolan. Well, what are the elements that I'm going to predict that Christopher Nolan's focusing on? Well, I wouldn't say to make a good film, you don't want to insult the intelligence of the audience. However, you can't really get all wrapped up in every single little research or finding that Oppenheimer made. But really, it's about the emotional journey with the overarching ticking time bomb. Well, there's a few directions that I believe he's going to take this story. I mean, one, you have family, you have his early life, how his mother, father, and brother play into his relationship. You have his politics, all of the problems that being left-leaning and a part of the Communistic Party brought into his life interpersonally just disrupted his research, his work. You have the story with his girlfriends and wife and affairs that is going to play a really emotional, dramatic part of the story, I'm sure. Christopher Nolan can lean into his skills, his ability, mixed with maybe his more antisocial, self-destructive tendencies, how that plays out. And obviously the mental health, there's always the inner struggle, especially with Cillian Murphy. There's always so much depth and hurt and pain mentally to his characters. That can be leaned into very heavily with this character Oppenheimer. But in my opinion, there was probably one thing initially that sold Christopher Nolan on telling this man's story, and I think it has to do with time. If you haven't seen the Studio Binder video on Christopher Nolan's directing style and how time plays into it, it's very interesting. I'll leave a link in the description that you can watch after this if you'd like. But essentially, there's this overarching narrative that's woven all through Christopher Nolan's stories of time and how everyone is basically a slave to time, and time plays such a big role in every single story he does. If you look at Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project and all of that meant for the world and for him personally, it's very interesting, especially this concept of time, which I think is why Christopher Nolan got sold on the story in the first place. You have the rush, the ticking time to basically discover and successfully test these nuclear weapons before the enemy does. You have the visual elements of literally the countdown to these tests to see if this test is going to work, if this is actually going to explode, if this nuclear weapon is actually going to work. But I think the interesting thing about this story is not just that a countdown to an explosion means success, but countdown to the explosion means the end of the war, essentially. And I think he's going to really lean into that heavily, and probably other time narratives that weave itself into his personal life in ways that we don't even see coming yet.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
I hope you all are looking forward to Oppenheimer, and I really hope this was educational. Thank you so much for watching. I would encourage you to please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Let me know any details that you found interesting about Oppenheimer's life, or what you're looking forward to seeing in the new Christopher Nolan's movie coming out this freaking year. If you want to click on the next video that's recommended to you right now, I'll see you over there.